How the did we just wake up in 2016 all over again? What happened?
The election is over, which means I am now unleashed and can actually talk about it. So tuck in. I'm going to give you the lowdown on what actually happened last night, and there's a lot to unpack. First, I'm Hannah Cox with Base Politics. Welcome to my channel where I bring you my politically homeless takes on politics and culture. Before we dive in today, make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel if you have not already, and of course, ring that notification bell so you never miss one of my episodes. So I always get a ton of DMs and comments when it comes to an election, asking why I'm not live streaming, why am I not talking about it more? And as I discussed yesterday on my video, it's mostly because I am legally not allowed to. Because I run a nonprofit as one of my two businesses, I'm pretty restrained on commentary around actual elections. It's known as electioneering, and people who work at nonprofits are not allowed to do it. And to be honest, while I sometimes find that restraint somewhat annoying because I like talking about things that everybody else is talking about online, I also kind of like it because elections are not my area of expertise. And I think that that's really important to understand when you're looking for political insights and commentary, is that politics and public policy sometimes go together, but are also very, very different worlds. I have never worked on campaigns. I've never worked on elections, and I don't want to because I hate the vast majority of politicians. But because of that, I also don't have a ton of expertise when it comes to these conversations. I don't know any better than you guys do, whether the polling is right, whether what's happening on the ground matches what the people on TV are telling you is happening. I am an expert at public policy, and that is the majority of what I cover and what I work on. And I will always do my best to be fair and intellectually honest and upfront about what I know and what I don't. But while I don't know a whole lot about elections, I was in the same position as most of you guys yesterday, where I thought it could go either way and it was anybody's guess. Analyzing after the fact is my forte because I'm a woman and analyzing things is my birthright. So after months of anxiety for everyone but these people, this actually cracked me up for those on audio. This is a graph that went around yesterday showing a spike in Google search results for people who were either looking up who the president was or for people who were not yet aware that Joe Biden had dropped out. And I just have to say, I kind of envy those people. Like, I hate them. I hate uninformed voters, but it looks nice over there. But after months and months of anxiety and nail biting for the rest of us who were paying attention leading up to election night, we finally know which parent got custody of us for the next 4 years. Trump won, and he won massively. He not only got most of the swing states, he got the popular vote, the Republicans kept the Senate, they most likely are going to have the House. Like, it's a full sweep. And this also means that he's likely going to get 2 new Supreme Court justice picks because both Alito and Thomas are rumored to be stepping down in the near future. And he won all of this with a pretty diverse coalition of voters. The only groups he did particularly bad with were young voters and Black people, women, and college-educated people. And it's important to know that while Harris did still get the majority of Latino voters, he actually picked up a lot of ground there too. And the reactions to this fact by Democrats bring me to the first point I want to discuss for why they lost, which is their arrogance. This guy, Justin, on Twitter said 45% from Latinos while running on a massive mass deportation campaign. I just don't get it, man. And I quote tweeted him and I said, Black people are often very tough on crime and anti-criminal justice reform. Latinos, the legal ones, are some of the most anti-illegal immigration people you'll encounter. This is what happens when a party claims to champion the rights of people they don't even bother to talk to, but assume that they can retain with vibes and identity politics. I really do think that that is true. Like, yes, Democrats have historically done better with minorities, but that has been changing for some time, and they are not owed the votes of these people. And really, if you look at the policies that they have been pushing for the past several decades, they have been very harmful to all Americans when it comes to the economy, at least. And that has particularly hurt minorities who were often already on the margins and were less likely to be doing good in the first place. And the fact that they don't know this, they don't sense this like changing attitude, it's really mind numbing. It really is indicative of the fact that a lot of these people live in bubbles. They live in Washington, D.C. or LA or New York. They don't know the people that they claim to be representing. And I just think that that's a huge pitfall for anybody who is in politics. If you're not doing the groundwork of actually getting to know the people that you claim to represent or that you want to win over, you're not going to be able to do your job. And I mean, I am not even somebody who works campaigns, like I said, but I have done extensive amounts of work on criminal justice reform. So by nature of that, I actually have worked with a lot of people in the Black community enough to know their opinions on things. I have done work on immigration reform. And so because of that, I have worked around many people in the Latino community enough to know their actual opinions on that and to know that there was a mismatch. Just because somebody is Latino does not mean that their dominant issue is letting a bunch more immigrants into the country. In fact, somebody who has had to go through the insane process to come here legally is probably not going to be okay with others skipping the line and basically getting a free pass that they didn't get. This is kind of just common sense, but they don't know this because they are so disconnected, and they really think that just by using identity politics and talking about race that they're going to maintain their leads with racial minorities. It's arrogance. And honestly, the Democrats' arrogance knows no bound. This is just one of many fronts. I mean, these people had the audacity to rig their primaries, which is something that Republicans and Democrats do all the time. I re-upped an old episode of mine that did an intense deep dive into the two-party system, into how our elections are legally rigged against giving us true representation, true options. I put that in the community notes on YouTube yesterday if you want to go back and watch it. I don't have time to fully get into the weeds of that here, but they did it again this time around. They knew Biden was deeply unpopular. They knew that there was significant support for another candidate within their party, but they didn't want to embarrass him. He was determined to stay in office. And so they basically rigged the system to prevent any primary challenges against him and coronated him as the candidate. And then when it became clear that they were going to lose with him, they rigged everything again and inserted Kamala Harris with no democratic process whatsoever. And I just think this was such a slap in the face to anybody who understands basic terminology. Like, these people are running all over the country whining about democracy, protect democracy, and you rigged your election. Like, you played in their faces, and you didn't only rig the election, you rigged it with a candidate who was so deeply unpopular, she never had a shot of getting the nomination through any actual legitimate process. On Twitter, my friend Rachel pointed this out and said, I mean, what did you expect when you basically selected without a primary election a candidate who got absolutely trounced by her own party the previous time she tried running for president? Political science students will study this as an all-time fumble. So yeah, arrogant count number 2. And I have a third, which is that Joe Biden ran as being a moderate and ran as being a unifier in 2020. And a lot of people bought into that message. A lot of people were sick of Trump. They were sick of his shenanigans. They were sick of his antics. They wanted normalcy. They wanted just less divisive country, I guess is the right way to put it. And they truly believed that he was going to set partisan politics aside and come in and govern as a moderate. And instead, he came in pretty much the first week in office and said he wanted to be the next FDR. FDR is a psychopath. He's a monster. He did more to ruin this country than anybody else I can really think of. I know a lot of libertarians throw out Woodrow Wilson when I say that. He was bad too, but listen, I just have it out for FDR more. Can't stand the scumbag. And then not only did he say that, but he really did try to replicate a lot of FDR's policies. And unfortunately, he was stopped a good bit of the time, but there were enough times that he wasn't, that Americans still had to suffer under his very bad ideas. This guy was a union shill. He went after the job market. He went after independent contractors, which is a growing and substantial part of the labor force. He was constantly undercutting labor, undercutting incomes with regulations. He was pushing tons and tons of more spending to give people special favors, corporate welfare, green agenda. I mean, the list goes on. And all it did was create a lot more inflation that people had to live with. Like, this guy in no way was a moderate. He was an extremist, and he did a lot of damage to the American people. And the American people were saying this for literally years leading up to this election. We don't like the economy. We don't like what's going on. We're sick of you gaslighting us about it. And yet they just kept going. I mean, even the job reports themselves have been inflated and made up. I've covered that here. And you cannot gaslight people into thinking the reality that they're living with does not exist. So yeah, people were pissed, rightfully so. And then they tried to come in after all that and pretend like they were going to run moderate again. Nobody believed them. While I really didn't have a dog in the race here, like, I truly hated both candidates, I think one of the big silver linings is that it is loud and clear Americans are not far left, and that the Democrats are going to have to run the kooks out of their party if they want to be competitive. They have let the socialists, under the name progressives, but like, we know what you are. Just say it. Just say what you are. We know what you are. You're not fooling anybody. They let these people come in and take over their party, and they're paying for it, and they should pay for it. These are my first thoughts on Twitter this morning. I wrote, while I hate Trump and doubt that will ever change, the good news is America effing hates progressive economics. Socialists don't stand a chance here. Like, as James Carville said in the 90s, it's the economy, stupid. It was always so clear that it was going to come down to the economy. And instead of getting down to business, they continued to try to claim that the economy was great, that they've done a good job. Kamala Harris on The View said she couldn't think of a single Biden policy that she would redo or undo. And polling showed this both before and after. About 4 in 10 voters consider the economy and jobs to be the most important problem facing the country, as frustration with inflation spiking in 2022 lingered in the form of higher grocery, housing, and gasoline cost. Roughly 2 in 10 voters said the top issue is immigration, again, where Trump thrived, and about 1 in 10 picked abortion. And again, that's a silver lining for me. Americans want to work. They want to be productive. They're not lazy. They're not leeches. They're not socialists. They want a meritocracy. They want opportunity. They care about the economy. And I think that that's a good thing. The unfortunate thing, I want to be clear, is that while I think they were refuting socialist progressive economics, having lived under them for the past 4 years, or at least a pretty good attempt at them, I'm not saying that Trump will be great on the economy either. That's something that people have already pushed back on me for. I don't think that. I actually think, in contrast, that Trump's economic agenda is equally problematic in many ways. It's just problematic in more of a mercantile capacity versus a socialist one. And unfortunately, I don't think Americans are educated enough to actually even understand his economic agenda. They just have a perception that the right is more pro-business, more pro-jobs, more pro-capitalist. And so they swung in that direction. And to be clear, they didn't have any other direction to swing to. Capitalism, a true capitalist, was not on the ballot this election. I think where the average American is they just knew that they hated the economy the past 4 years, that they're sick of our money being sent overseas, that they are done with wars and the machine that profits off of them, and that they're fed up with being called racist when they speak out against the left's agenda. I don't think that Trump won so heavily because people just love Trump. I actually think it's quite the opposite. I think people are desperate for change. They want a bull in a china shop. They want something to give, and they were clamoring for any other option other than what they've had for the past 4 years. As Joe Concha pointed out in CNN's exit poll, 72% of voters were dissatisfied or angry about the state of the country, while enthusiastic netted just 7%. So the writing was on the wall. The polls were close. And again, because I'm not an expert, I really couldn't do anything other than listen to the pollsters, some of which were even starting to indicate they thought Kamala would break ahead and have a landslide. But I really think when you dig into these kinds of facts and sentiments, it shouldn't surprise you what happened last night. People want change. People want some economic relief. It really is as simple as that. And immigration is inherently attached to that for many people. Now, as you guys know, if you follow me, I fundamentally disagree. Immigration is a net positive. I think people have been fear-mongered and are completely incorrect in many of the sentiments that they hold towards immigrants. And that has been true throughout history. This is nothing new what we're experiencing. But people being anti-immigration is not because they're all a bunch of racists. It is because they feel like that is undercutting their economic security. You would hope to see the left actually reflect on some of that and recognize the actual issues that people are facing. But instead, They're doing their usual this morning and running around saying that essentially the country is just filled with racists and bigots and morons, and they maybe needed to have run a further left candidate. Yes, really, they're saying that. This socialist journalist says, if you read leftist publications and listen to left commentators, you will have a far better grasp on political reality. That's hysterical. We warned that Biden was a disaster before liberals realized. We warned Kamala was messing this up. Like, yes, they did. But they warned that because they wanted her to be a socialist communist or him to be a socialist communist, and they weren't far left enough. So I think she probably lost the like 10% of extremists who are in this camp. But it's laughable to suggest that had she like run further left and kept these crazies with her, that would have made her president versus actually like disenfranchising the moderate, sane people that she was able to get. Like, this is delusional. Another person said, there is a reason why educated people vote blue. What we're seeing is the uneducated population of America holding the rest of the country hostage. This is why there's such a push to weaken education, ban books, and outlaw the teaching of Black history by the Republican Party. And I love that John Gabriel quote tweeted her and said, have you tried talking down to people? Like, nobody on the right is trying to undercut education. In fact, they're trying to push school choice so that Americans can actually get a quality education because they know they're never going to get it in government schools. This is ridiculous. Mehdi Hassan, who is always unhinged, also weighed in on Twitter and said the only way a convicted criminal found liable for sexual abuse who incited an armed insurrection could win again is because millions of Americans live in an information bubble and believe things are manifestly and demonstrably untrue. I think that's accurate, but I think you're one of them, Mehdi. Now, there were fortunately many Democrats who were behaving sanely online. This guy said, I voted for her. I think he's a bad guy. But if you lose the Senate, House, Electoral College, and the popular vote, and you think the lesson is half the country is racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and stupid, wrong lesson. And the same thing will likely happen in 2028. Matthew Iglesias also said, don't have the energy to rebut bad takes one by one, but if you look at the breadth of the loss across the map and come up with the one weird trick for how Democrats could have won is by being more left-wing, then you're just not engaging with reality, which I guess is your business. Like, I don't know who they think this is going to compel. Stop gaslighting people. Stop calling them names. Reckon with the crazy people in your movement and get back down to business. I don't think that this repudiation of the Biden administration and Kamala Harris was just based on the economy. I think it's more broadly about the mentality around the economy, because this administration has run woke and they have pushed a standard of approaching jobs, approaching college admissions, approaching opportunity based on identity politics versus meritocracy. So the backlash is, yes, against their economic policies, but it's also against their DEI hires, their identity politics, constantly trying to pick winners and losers in society and in the economy based on the color of people's skin versus their work ethic. And people are fed up with that. And they're fed up for being gaslit about that too. Now, as you might have expected, the hypocrisy coming out of Democratic circles has already started, and I don't know. I'm going to revel a little bit here because I think it's hilarious. My friend Zach Lilly said, I'm sure all the people who wanted to get rid of the filibuster and sack the Supreme Court yesterday afternoon still hold these positions this morning. Yeah, they are scarce to be found online today. This guy said, Democrats control the White House and Senate until January 3rd, 2025. They need to treat the next 2 months as if a fascist is taking over to fundamentally change America. They have levers of power. They need to use them. This cannot be business as usual. Like, if you are only pro-limited government when you lose, I think you're a fool. You're an abject fool. And to be clear, this is something that is like a massive problem for Democrats. They really are constantly pushing to do extreme crazy things to rig the system for themselves, like getting rid of the filibuster, like packing the Supreme Court, and they never think how it could be used against them. It is mind-numbingly stupid to observe. I also liked this point I saw a lot of people sharing that says, and overnight, everyone will appreciate the demise of Chevron deference, which is just so funny because I covered Chevron in depth. I was very excited to see Chevron overturned. If you missed all of that, getting rid of the Chevron deference will essentially strip power away from the presidency and unelected bureaucrats. And the left was losing their minds when the Supreme Court struck it down earlier this year, which is just quite funny. Yesterday, before the results came in, I said that it was a sad state of affairs when all I could really hope for was a decisive win and a peaceful transfer of power, because I knew that one side in particular, the Republicans, would only do that if they won. And I think that that is a damning indictment on Republicans. I really have no patience for people in that camp. It's one of the reasons I hate Trump. I mean, I hated Trump before all of that mess in 2020, but like it really like accelerated my dislike of him. And to Kamala Harris's immense credit, we are going to have a peaceful transfer of power this time around. As my friend Amisha said, who is a prominent Democrat commentator, but also one of my best friends from college, voters showed up for him. He won. In a democracy, we respect the will of the people. These numbers are decisive. And she was responding to somebody online who was already trying to basically say they didn't believe in the validity of the results. Another person on Twitter was mocking the fact that Kamala Harris will have to be the one to certify the results of the election as the current vice president. And as Andrew Fleischman pointed out, what's even better is that she's going to certify them without a fuss, and there will be a peaceful transfer of power as it should be. Now, one thing that there has been a suspicious lack of commentary around today is, of course, the threat to our elections and election security, which, you know, if Trump had lost would be the only thing we were hearing about today at all. As I said, if you were someone who was talking about how insecure our voting system is yesterday and aren't today, or vice versa, just know you look like a clown. And I do mean that, okay? I really cannot stand the election denial BS. I think it is something that is extremely detrimental to our foundations, to our security as a nation. We have always had peaceful transfers of power in this country. We have always had leaders that respect the results of elections, that respect the will of the American people. And Trump is the one glaring exception to that. And I do think it's inexcusable. Like truly, if you think that there was massive fraud in 2020, even though it's been debunked ad nauseum, but you still somehow believe that, and you were worried about it yesterday, but now you like think it's all clear, everything's fine, like you're a clown. Like, do you think they just forgot to rig it this year? I mean, be so serious. And I guess I shouldn't say that like there's no conversation around this today. Obviously, there are some Democrats who are trying to question the results of the election. Notably, they're just like grassroots losers. It's not people in actual positions of power like we saw with the Republicans in 2020. But I have also seen some Republican grassroots spreading this graphic around, basically showing that there was a huge spike in the number of people who voted for Biden in 2020 that has dropped off, and that 2020 was an outlier election year that had a lot more people voting in it. And I think that they think this is some kind of gotcha to prove that 2020 really was stolen because like 12 million fewer people voted for Kamala versus Biden. But this isn't a gotcha to me at all because it's easily explained. Number one, I think a lot more people chose to stay home because of the unpopularity of the candidate. People didn't like Kamala. They've already had to live under a Kamala adjacent administration for 4 years. Biden did not have that same problem going into 2020. Again, people truly believed that he would be a moderate. People truly believed that he was somebody that would be a unifier. He had the ability to come in and campaign that way. Kamala didn't, because the past 4 years have been a hot mess. She also had the Israel-Palestine conflict that I think hurt her. I mean, you cannot ignore that. And I honestly, it's kind of made me laugh because you have a lot of people, particularly people who are Jewish, who think that she is super anti-Israel and that she basically would not support Israel, even though the Biden administration has supported Israel pretty heavily. And then you've got the pro-Palestine people who think that she's like an Israel simp and who hated her for that reason. And so that issue alone, I think, cost her a good number of people. You also, again, have the fact that they rigged the primary this time around, okay? In 2020, Biden was democratically selected and elected as the Democratic nomination. He had a solid basis of support. She wasn't. She was never popular amongst Democrats. She did abysmally. The only reason she was ever made his vice president was because she is a Black woman. Like, that is literally the long and short list of what got her to her current position. She's terribly unpopular. She's very unlikable. People think she's stupid, and I haven't really seen any evidence to contrast that. Other factors have also changed since 2020. One major thing I can think of is that you had COVID as a massive driver. People were terrified. They didn't know what was going to happen. Everything was up in the air. Like, people were very, very incentivized to go vote around that time period. And additionally, by nature of the pandemic, we did have an expansion of mail-in voting in 2020, which, yes, will increase who votes. I mean, everybody knows that, right? If you make it easier for people to vote, you're going to have more people vote. That's why Republicans have largely always been opposed to it, because traditionally high turnout is bad for Republicans. And listen, I'm totally fine with states passing laws to increase the appearance of security in our elections. And I say the appearance because our elections are shockingly secure for a country our size. There's very little fraud. And when there is fraud, it is regularly discovered and thrown out. But I understand that in not setting better parameters around our elections, you're giving some credence to the crazies who will always use that fact to try to scare people and rile them up and undercut people's faith in our elections. So yeah, have states pass voter ID laws, have them make it where it is a stricter process around mail-in ballots. I don't care, whatever, but you can't pretend to think that it's a conspiracy or fraud when you have a pandemic and people need to stay home and you allow them to vote from home and more people vote because it's easier to vote in that election. This is not rocket science. And on top of all of that, you have the fact that a lot of people have died since 2020, you bozos. In fact, since 2020, there's been a significant increase in death. You had approximately 3.39 million Americans who died in 2020, marking a 19% increase from 2019, which was largely due to COVID. And then in 2021, you saw that high level of mortality continue with around 3.46 million deaths influenced by ongoing pandemic fatalities as well as other health factors. Preliminary figures for 2022 indicated that annual deaths remained elevated, though somewhat reduced compared to the peak years of the pandemic. But for a rough total, the combined deaths across these years amount to about 10.5 million from 2020 through 2022, which is suspiciously close to the 12 million difference in voters that we saw for the Democrats from 2020 to 2024. So you guys have 0 point here. While our elections are secure, and I will stand by that all day, they are a sham. As I covered in my elections issue, our elections have been legally rigged against independent challengers, against third parties, even against people who want to primary others within the party system, because the DNC and RNC are private entities. They can literally do whatever they want, even though they get your tax dollars to exist. It is an extremely corrupt system. I want to be clear about that. But there's a difference in our elections being a sham and being secure and how they are counted and processed. Ultimately, some things are going to be better under Trump. Others will almost certainly be worse. Look, I've never liked or supported Trump. I make no secret of that. I hate what he's done to the GOP. I hate how anti-capitalist, big government, and anti-individual liberty they have become under him. And I think there will likely be some very, very bad policies that are unconstitutional and attacks on the free market because of that fact. But that would have been true if Kamala won too. We were up a creek either way. As I said yesterday, I just don't think things can meaningfully improve until, one, Americans get smarter, and two, until we break the two-party system. Me personally, I don't currently have representation of my views when it comes to this government, and that's probably true for many of you as well. But while we may be without representation, we are not without a voice, and we are not without the tools we need to influence our system. I consider it my job to keep you informed on ways and opportunities that you can use those tools every day. And really, whether a Democrat or a Republican is in office, my job does not change, other than my right-leaning audience getting mad at me and calling me names when I call out their leaders for doing the same crap as the other guys. Republicans have been given a tremendous amount of power for the next 4 years. We're going to see how they use it on this show. I will be holding them accountable when needed, and I will be working to champion good policies as they come. I am a fundamental believer, as Frederick Douglass was, that you work with anybody to do right and nobody to do wrong. So on an issue by issue basis, I will pick my allegiances, and I think you should too. All right, guys, I hope you liked this episode. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to my channel if you've not already, and if you want even more content, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok.